I just wanted to briefly say a couple of words about the IGDC here at York. For anybody who's not familiar with the IGDC, we're the Interdisciplinary Global Development Centre, and we're a member organisation within the university, which allows us to pull together work that's going on in different faculties and different disciplines and in different topic areas across the university, where there's a common thread around interests in problems related to global development. So really our role and kind of purpose within the university is try to ensure that those people who are working on global development issues aren't kind of atomized across the university and not talking to each other. So we provide a forum for researchers to come together and to share ideas, and ultimately for those ideas to come together into proposals for new research and practice orientated developments from within the university. One of those areas that we've focused on over the last couple of years has been in relation to decolonisation of global development research in particular. And we were lucky enough last year to work with Joseph, who you'll hear from in a moment, who really led our work in this space through the production of a series of podcasts that, Joseph, I suspect you're going to mention this, aren't you? So I don't want to steal your thunder. The culmination of which was a huge kind of repository of information, knowledge, insights that have subsequently been pulled together into a working paper that we're delighted to be able to launch today and is now available on the IGDC website, which I think you can see on screen. If you're a member of the university, or if you're not, you can join the IGDC and get regular updates about our activities. We host events like this, including in partnerships with others across the university. So it's great today to be working alongside the EDI Research Centre. With that, I'll hand over, I think, back to Carisha, yeah?
Yes, and I will be very brief. Most of you have heard this spiel already anyways. This is just to remind you guys who we are. We are the EDI Research Centre, and this year we kind of have partnerships with various very well-established centres within the university, and so we're very pleased to be working with the IGDC on this. Some of our achievements include the EDI Research Framework. We also have an EDI Advisory Board to which you can submit questions and queries if you have any kind of questions in relation to your research across our 4 themes, which are highlighted on the right-hand side of the slide in front of you. So dismantling systemic inequities through and within research, inclusive research methods and methodologies, decolonizing research, for which we are here today, and pedagogical research and the scholarship of teaching and learning. And there are different people across the university that sit on our advisory board should you need any help or assistance. The EDI Research Framework also kind of outlines kind of additional people that you can go to, so people who have been quite successful in the areas that we are focusing on. This is one of our seminars for decolonizing research, and at the end of the events, we'll speak to you about what we have planned in terms of the networking events within this area. Again, partnered with John and the IGDC, and also just bringing a little pop on the EDI conference that we are planning for in June. So keep your eyes out for that, and we'll be looking for presenters, etc., for that as well. So, just a brief overview of what we'll be doing today. We are a bit over with our introduction, but that was the introduction. And then I'll hand over to John to introduce Joseph and the work that he will be doing. So he'll giving us an overview of the working paper, which has brought us all together today. And then we'll have Tony speaking to us about decolonizing research impact, Divine on decolonizing research methods. We'll have a bit of a break, and we'll end up with, oh, sorry, not Tony again, with Medina. Sorry, I forgot to change this when I copied pasted, so I will change this while we're having Joseph speak. Medina speaking to us about decolonizing research partnerships, and then we'll end with some closing remarks. So without further ado, I'll let John hand over to Joseph. I'll let John introduce Joseph. And Joseph, do you have slides that you need to share with us so I can unshare? I could stop sharing, right?
Yeah, no, I don't have any slides. I'm just going to babble away quickly.
Well,
So-
Joseph, over to you.
Okay.
You can probably do a better job of introducing yourself than I can, but it's great to
Sure.
Joseph can join us today.
Sure. Well, thank you. And yeah, in the interest of time, I'll just crack on and say good morning, all. It's great to be with you again and to see so many people interested in this subject and in this paper. As John previously mentioned, in spring-summer last year, I joined the IGDC to work on their Decolonising Global Development podcast project. And the impetus for the project was a sense that there had been a lot of talk about decolonising research recently, what it means, why it's necessary, and so on, but that there was a real need to move the discussion forwards and think about the steps that researchers can take to decolonise their work in practical terms. And this built on the IGDC's long-standing commitment to effecting practical change through research, keen to actually put ideas into practice in meaningful ways. So throughout this whole project, we wanted to hear from researchers with real-world experience of decolonial research, alongside those like Dr. Furr, who have done so much to advance the theory and the principles underpinning decolonial work. So to that end, we approached potential speakers who have used or drawn on inclusive methodologies, have tried to build equitable partnerships between the global north and the global south, and or have worked hard to put research really at the service of global south communities, often going against the long-standing practices of established institutions and disciplines. And we were really pleased to find great enthusiasm for this project from researchers across a wide range of disciplines and backgrounds. In total, I think we heard from about 11 speakers representing or having detailed research experience in at least 10 different countries, and whose work really defies standard disciplinary categorization, but touches on fields including philosophy, development, education, public health, medicine, and peace building. And we heard from well-established academics and theorists, alongside non-academic speakers like Emily Flower, who brought an entirely different perspective as a York-based filmmaker. And it was particularly interesting, I thought, to hear from speakers who didn't necessarily regard their work, or certainly didn't label their practice as decolonial, but nonetheless had been using and developing some of the methods and approaches typically thought of as decolonial. For example, we heard from Dr. Oliver Craig about how more equitable partnerships could be developed within the niche field of bioarchaeology, whilst Professor Steve Sinderby described how inclusive practices can benefit the field of human geography. So overall, our diverse pool of contributors showed three key things. First, that there was great appetite for putting ideas about decolonial research into practice. Second, that many researchers are already independently using what we here might call decolonial practice, and so there was a lot to gain from transdisciplinary collaboration and the sharing of experiences. And third, and relatedly, that there was a great diversity of ways that decolonial practice can be built into current and future research projects, regardless of those projects' discipline, scope, or scale. So in our podcast, we especially wanted to focus on some of the challenges our contributors had encountered during their research. We rather took it as a given that decolonial research is a good thing, and there are already a great number of guides and models for decolonial research published by universities, funding institutions, NGOs, and so on. Indeed, in 2022, the IGDC published its own guide to inclusive research, which you can find on that same website. So rather than add to the plethora of idealistic guidebooks, in this project, we wanted to move the conversation on further still and look at some of the main challenges researchers using decolonial practices are likely to encounter. The rationale here was that we kind of know what decolonial research should or could look like in an ideal setting, but that in the real world it's likely to pose obstacles that need to be worked through and overcome, certainly if decolonial research is to become accepted as realistic, sustainable, and effective research practice. The last thing we want to see is a flurry of projects initiated, claiming to be built on decolonial principles, all then hitting insurmountable obstacles and ending in project collapse and disappointment and frustration, which in turn could lead to a backlash against decolonial practice in the future. So by flagging potential obstacles now and discussing ways our contributors have met and handled them, our podcast project helps listeners to predict challenges they may encounter and presents ways in which they can be tackled. Whilst, as I said, our podcast heard from a wide range of speakers from across disciplines, there were, though, a number of common challenges raised. These include institutional reluctance, on some cases, to support unconventional research methods, the assumed added cost of time and money incurred in some decolonial research methods, and a perceived tension between strict research design and project timeframes on the one hand, and the need for flexibility and adaptivity on the other. And also the extent to which researchers can meaningfully understand and incorporate different cultures and modes of knowledge into their own research. Reflecting their diverse experience, our speakers presented multiple ways in which one can begin to address and work through these challenges. Naturally, the obstacles one faces and thus the ways one responds to them will vary from researcher to researcher and from project to project. Things like institutional resistance, for instance, will depend on one's institution, the standard practice pervasive in the relevant discipline, and even one's position within that institution, I might add. Similarly, the tension between fixed project design and flexibility will be influenced by the project's scope and scale, as well as the demands of funding institutions and the project team's temporal and financial constraints. For me, the overriding takeaway message from all our contributors was that conversation and dialogue is key. Dialogue between the researcher and their institutions, between the researcher and their partners and stakeholders, for want of a better word, and perhaps most importantly, dialogue between the researcher and the wider community where the research takes place and whom it affects. Such dialogue is essential in building trust between all parties, fostering reliable and equitable relationships where possible, embedding research outputs in the target community in a sustainable way, and developing decolonial research as accepted and trusted practice in global North institutions. All of these insights and the experience gathered through our podcast project, not to mention an extensive literature review, have since been collected into this detailed working paper. Our paper, published by the IGDC, builds on the key points of the podcast and examines the opportunities and, importantly, the challenges of decolonizing research under the themes of partnerships, research methods, and impact. In this paper, we do not prescribe best practice or provide a checklist of what researchers must do and must not do in order for their work to be categorized as decolonial. Instead, our working paper provides a useful toolkit of ideas and suggestions which researchers can draw on throughout a research project. It flags some key issues and ideas they might want to consider in the earliest stages of research design, discussing these with funders and institutions, and laying the groundwork for community engagement and collaborative partnerships. And it also provides suggestions for how obstacles encountered during the course of a project can be worked through. Whilst we've couched both the podcast and the paper loosely in terms of global development studies, this toolkit is relevant to all disciplines and will be useful to researchers at any stage of their career, I'd say from PhD onwards, certainly. It was a real pleasure to be involved in this project and to meet and talk to many amazing and fascinating speakers, hearing about their experiences and sharing in their enthusiasm. So I'm really very happy to see this working paper published, and I'm very glad to see that it has motivated ongoing discussion and interest. Personally, I don't see decolonizing research as an end or as a tickable box, but more as a journey or a principle towards which we can work as individual researchers, as departments, as institutions, and so on. So this paper is not prescriptive or definitive, but as the term working paper implies, it is a contribution to an ongoing discussion which invites critique and suggestion, as well, hopefully, as some interest. So to that end, I'm delighted that we have three such wonderful speakers here with us to share their perspectives, and I really look forward to hearing what they have to say. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for that, Joseph. And if you check the chat, you see that John put in the various resources that Joseph mentioned during his talk. So without further ado, we will move on to our first speaker, Tony. I hope I don't butcher your name, Ruhana. And Tony is going to share his screen.
Thank you, Karisha, thank you, Trish, and everyone for organizing this webinar. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to reading the working paper. So, my name is Tony Ruhana. So, Karisha, you didn't butcher my name. This is great. And I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for the Comparative Study of Civil War, where I lead the Middle East component of the Civil War Paths project. I study collective identities, conflict, and war in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, where I combine ethnographic fieldwork with online data using mixed methods approaches to analyze different types of data. For the Civil War Paths project, I have been conducting life history interviews with ex-combatants and stakeholders who had first-hand experiences during the war and post-war periods. In this talk, I will go over the impact definition according to the Research Excellence Framework, then move over to practical strategies I used, plan to use, and attempted to use and failed, as well as challenges and considerations I and colleagues have faced. Then I will give first-hand examples from my research. The Research Excellence Framework, REF, defines research impact as the effect of research on society and the economy beyond academia. And that includes changes to culture, the economy, the environment, health, public policy, quality of life, or society, the creation of new knowledge and innovation, the invention of new products, companies, and jobs, the development of new and improved public services and policy, the enhancement of quality of life and health. Research impact is weighted at 25% in the REF assessment, along with 60% for the outputs and 15% of the environment. And I like you to keep in mind these numbers because I'll come back to them when I'm concluding. I will start by going over some practical strategies in decolonizing research that I've experienced and I think are important. I will go over 5 main categories that I think are necessary to decolonize research impact. Decolonizing impact, I think, requires fundamentally rethinking what constitutes valuable research outcomes. Community-centered metrics is one of the first, I think, decolonizing impact metrics that we need to rethink, and that requires developing metrics that communities themselves identify as meaningful. And of course, that depends on the project and the community in question. I also think in order to decolonize impact metrics, we need to pay attention to locally centered policy assessments. And that includes tracking how research influences policy changes at the local level, which is usually dismissed in large-scale projects. Lastly, decolonizing impact metrics requires community-centered empowering knowledge, and that means to assess the impact of the research project's knowledge production and outcomes in empowering local communities' agendas, and that includes the community's relationship with local, regional, national, and international institutions. The second strategy would be co-producing research outputs. And that includes output diversification which requires the creation of outputs in formats determined by community partners. And that includes videos, podcasts, community workshops, theater, visual arts, or oral presentations, as well as local academic journal publications. Co-producing research outputs also requires multilingual development, which means producing key materials in relevant languages, including indigenous languages, with careful attention to conceptual translation. Co-producing research outputs also requires practical toolkits, and that includes developing applied resources that communities can directly use, such as decision-making frameworks, educational materials, or advocacy tools. And of course, all of this is in the context of measuring impact. So all of the above should be measured in terms of impact. The third or fourth strategy would be relational knowledge production systems. So rather than extracting knowledge from communities and disseminating findings primarily to academic audiences, we need to establish relational knowledge production systems. And by that, I mean a community review process, which implement community review panels with authority equal to academic peer review to evaluate research interpretations and impact. Establishing feedback loops, which is the processes for communities to challenge, refine, and expand upon research findings before finalization, and impact. So impact is also measured by these communities. Data sharing protocols, which includes providing access to data sets and recorded data, and that is also part of impact. Long-term knowledge exchange relationships, which is also setting up these relationships with the communities beyond the project's timelines. One of the impact measures should be community-centered disseminations, and that is kind of like counterintuitive to academic journals, because they remain the primary validated channels for research dissemination. So decolonizing impact requires legitimizing alternative channels, which includes networks with local and indigenous newspapers, TVs, blogs, radio, and podcasts, and local academic journals to share our findings. It could be arts-based dissemination. It also could be community knowledge centers where the outputs are accessible and under local control or local community control. The academic cycle, and this is my last strategy, which includes rethinking research impact timelines, because the academic cycles conflicts with the meaningful decolonial impact, which often develops over longer time frames rather than the academic time frames. And this requires researchers to develop a research design and timeline that factors in that decolonizing impact takes more time than usual. And that could be through an ongoing evaluation as part of the impact measurement with short, medium, and long-term outcomes, rather than using a project endpoint impact as the measurement. Now I will go over some of the challenges and considerations, and then I will give examples from the research. So, in my opinion, as long as impact, output, and environment, such as they are present in REF, are measured in a zero-sum game which adds up to 75% for the output and environment and 25% for the impact, it is going to be very difficult to accommodate all of the requirement of decolonizing research because of that fixed zero-sum game. In addition, there are institutional challenges that do not facilitate decolonizing research. These challenges include academic promotion criteria, which is similar to REF. So your academic promotion is measured with peer-reviewed articles mostly and other parts. It's changing, but I think it needs more, it needs to accommodate better changes for decolonizing research. Ethics protocol in many places do not take into consideration some cultural and local norms. Funding bodies often prioritize conventional impact metrics over community-centered approaches. And then it ends up being on the researchers to try to elaborate on how the impact metrics can be also counted through community-centered approaches. There is also the problem of resource allocation in terms of what goes where and who has access to the whole money scheme that is provided for a research project, and we need to, and this is challenging, especially when there are limitations from the funders. And then lastly, how to measure impact. It's still very difficult to quantify community level impacts and report them to the funders and to the academic community. And this is also one of the main challenges. In terms of examples, I will give examples from my own projects. So in the Civil War Paths, for the case of Lebanon, I worked with Fighters for Peace, which is a Lebanese local NGO established by ex-combatants who fought each other during the 15-year Civil War, and in post-war Lebanon have decided to become Fighters for Peace because of the absence of formal reconciliation processes and an absent discussion about the war, which still haunts and polarizes Lebanese society at every juncture. As part of a relational knowledge production system, I asked Fighters for Peace to serve as advisory board members for the case of Lebanon for a first-hand involvement in feedback, assessment, and revision of the knowledge production from the data collected in Lebanon. As part of the co-producing research outputs strategy, we are in the process of co-authoring a book centered on Fighters for Peace experiences and which they will use as education material in their attempt to fill some gaps in the absence of official history about the war. For them, this book might become a viable example in their bid to push the Ministry of Education in Lebanon to include a history of the war in their curriculum, and to show that a history of the Lebanese Civil War is not necessarily conflictual. This also fulfills some of the requirements for myself as an academic, because we are trying to publish it with a university press. And this is another challenge that I will touch upon in a second. Some of the institutional challenges that I faced was the anonymity requirement, and that's still from the same example, Fighters for Peace. In many instances, the anonymity is proving to be counterproductive. For example, with Fighters for Peace, who pride themselves of taking initiative to address the horrors of the Lebanese Civil War, when there was no official reconciliation and remembering process, wanted their names to accompany these experiences that they shared with me and be part of the outputs, but the ethics requirements and grant conditions did not allow for that. So we had to navigate this in different ways, and in my opinion, these ways are still they don't fulfill what this community is asking for. But sometimes we are forced, and this is one of the failed examples. We are also trying to find a university press that will publish such a book and translate the book to Arabic. This has been hard, but thankfully there is interest from from some university presses. Some of them will not accommodate the Arabic, but I think we found one. As soon as we finalize, I will announce the name. One last challenge, I know I'm a bit over time, is conducting field work in FCDO red listed areas, and this needs also revision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. That was really very engaging. We have some questions for you, but I want to push it out to the attendees. Does anyone have any questions before we jump in with ours? You're free to unmute yourself and say, or you can just type it into the chat. And so I'll get started with mine. So I was really quite intrigued by your work with the fighters, and I wanted to ask. Oh, sorry. There's something that came into the chat, but I will ask my question first. I wanted to ask, essentially, you said that you had to navigate the ethics, and I want to know from that experience, kind of, that is a challenge that you've identified. Are there any other main challenges that you think researchers will face when adopting like these non-traditional methods of engaging with audiences? And kind of give us some details on kind of how you manage to navigate these ethical challenges.
Thank you, Karisha, for the question. So the field work is always challenging, and it's always trying to balance what we are trained to do here and what are we expected to be in the field. And it's not always it's always as Joseph said, a conversation between the researcher and the communities. And these challenges sometimes clash, especially when we are in a fixed, rigid structure of like, I cannot negotiate anything with the community because of some academic requirements or some funding requirements. And these are massive challenges. And sometimes some of these requirements are really important, but having standardized requirements is problematic. So for example, I believe that anonymity in the case of Syria is crucial, or was crucial, because it was still an ongoing war, versus in Lebanon, it's past the war, people are living together, especially this group. So it could be, some of it should be anonymous and some of it should be non-anonymous. So it always depends on the context, I think. And this is where the bureaucratic structures do not allow for this type of flexibility. Other challenges were gender norms in different cultural contexts were a bit challenging to navigate and to keep at peace with my positioning. And it's always asking my position versus the other community without having to just drop out my position all the times, even though I'm a researcher and there is a power structures to that.
Thank you so much for that, Tony. That's a really good giving a bit more of an overview for us. So that is really interesting. We do have one in the chat, but I'm gonna go to I'm gonna butcher your name. I'm very sorry. I'm gonna say Syra, but then I'm also saying
Perfect.
Oh,
Parisha,
perfect.
fantastic. You got it right in one.
Syra, what question do you have for Tony?
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much to the organizers for creating this space, which is both very important, but increasingly also timely. My name is Syra. I'm actually a colleague of Tony's. We work on the same project, so we know each other very well. Fantastic presentation, Tony. Always so wonderful to hear about the incredible work that you're doing. So my question is to Tony, but maybe also more broadly to everybody joining us in the virtual room today. And that is, given what the geopolitical climate is unfortunately becoming around the spaces we have for concepts like decolonization, but also EDI, right? My question is, how important is it to you to maintain that language, that vocabulary of decolonization in the work that you're doing in service of this wider movement of resistance, versus how willing or how appropriate do you think that it is to maybe compromise or sacrifice or alter the words we use to remain present in this space and continue doing that work, but potentially under a different or more palatable guise? This is something that I'm sitting with a lot, especially currently in the work that I do outside of the academy, where I'm being asked more and more to maintain decolonial values and principles, but without that actual language. And I'm not really sure how I feel about that. So I'd love to hear how other people are maybe sitting with the same issue.
That is a
so
very deep question for 10 a.m. But I would love to hear what Tony has to say. And this is probably something that John and Enrique can also tap into. Tony, would you like to go first?
So to me, I go back to we have a say in Lebanon that I'm not at ease using. It's kind of like, what is your goal? Is to say something or to do something? And then to me, doing it is in many instances, especially with that when I'm part of a bigger structure that I cannot change, is to do something rather than just say it with the knowledge that it's impossible to do. And I'm not going to expand more because I know we have limited time.
Yeah.
And basically, I'll keep it at that. But that's my position for this question.
Thank you so much,
Tony. I know I have questions in the chat. Please put your emails. I will reply in the email.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that, Tony. John, do you want to say something, or do you want us to head over to the next speaker?
I suspect we're short on time. I think this is a really important question, though. I suppose the only thing I would add is that radical concepts in research and development are constantly having to be reinvented in the face of co-option, frequently into the discourses of multilateral institutions where they become where the language is actually retained but watered down. Here we face a slightly different challenge in terms of the use of language, but I think being agile around the language that we use without losing track of the principles that we uphold is hopefully something that we are experienced with as a sector.
Thank you so much, John. So without further ado, we're going to move on to Divine. Divine is joining us from the University of Cape Town, and he was speaking to us about decolonizing research methods. Divine, do you have a set of slides that you'd like to share?
I have neither power nor point, so.
Okay, well, we'll just watch your face while you speak to us.
No, you can take it off, I think.
You can take it off? Okay.
Yes, yeah, please. I every morning I'm forced to see the mirror, so I should not be worshiping myself in the front. Yeah, but thank you for inviting, and thank you for the opportunity of being part of the the project and the initiative and also the reflections, and for taking up this challenge, which I think is an important challenge for our time. They say every generation has its own challenge. Every generation has to have its own goal, its own objective. And I'm trained by so many people, and one of those fathers that I have is Francis Nyamjo, and he always likes to talk about a life without purpose. That every time he encounters you and he asks, so what's your purpose and what's your objective? So that's a question that we have to ask. What is our purpose and what is our objective? And what is the purpose of our time? What's the purpose of our presence in this time? Many years ago, I used to be taught that once you find your purpose in life, you've resolved so many things, because then you don't spend time wasting lots of time. You focus on ensuring that you make your contribution. So I come from the Cameroon grass fields in a place called Mankanikong in Bafut, and we spend a lot of time focusing on what we need to do to contribute. So once you found your purpose, you need to make that contribution and really focus on it. And I think the challenge of our time, also seeking to respond to the last question, is really how to deal with these centuries and centuries of particular forms of oppression that continue to manifest and remanifest themselves in so many ways. When we talk about resilience and about resistance, these forms of oppression are very resistant and very resilient. They find ways of reproducing themselves. And over the years, it's been articulated in so many different ways. And somehow it has remained constant that when you bring whiteness together with particular forms of toxic patriarchy, it creates a particular kinds of supremacy that is very difficult to undo. And here I want to make the difference between white and whiteness, something that we seem to conflate all the time. White, which is a particular body, but whiteness, which is an essence that many people can have access to. And this essence is the essence that is embedded in imperialism. It's the essence that is embedded in colonization, in colonialism. This is an essence that we see in forms of supremacy. This is an essence that we see in different forms of oligarchies. This is an essence that we see in particular forms of violence and all forms of exclusion. So what we are particularly concerned with is this essence, which is whiteness, and something that we have to call. And it is something that we all desire. Whiteness is something that makes you to conflate freedom with liberation, that you spend your time as a continent trying to seek liberation, but you stop at freedom instead of moving on to liberate yourself. So we can spend so many years saying we are free, but we are not liberated. And I think that's a challenge that we're faced with. How do we move from freedom to liberation? How do we move from freedom to liberation? That's, for me, the decolonial challenge. For me, what this project is about. And while this project, just like all emancipatory projects, come from particular places of identity crisis, it is about an entanglement, and it is about a coexistence, and it's about a cohabitation. And I like to say that all emancipatory projects are about cohabitation. And that's we see today that is conflated. Oh, you know, we don't want DEI because it's about, you know, particular people, you know. We don't want decolonization. We should find another term for it so it makes people change is uncomfortable, you know? Change is uncomfortable. When we say we need to push a feminist project, there's no other way. We have to push it. We cannot find another term outside of it. When we say there has to be gender equality, there has to be gender equality because women struggle. So when people say we should find other terms and other concepts, I'm sorry, you have to confront it. And we cannot pretend. And by confronting it, by acknowledging it, by really taking this particular form of being, of inhabiting the world, of invading the world seriously, it means that we can develop systematic approaches to first understand it, to understand how it manifests itself, to understand how it reproduces itself, to understand its resilience, and then to understand how to undo it. And you cannot do that if you pretend that it is something else. You know, colonialism is a reality, you know, like many other projects. Imperialism is a reality, like many other projects, but it intersects with many other things to right itself so that the violence and violations of this project remain very deep and long after it disappears, if we take Anne Stoller's work seriously about imperial debris. So it continues after. And that's why even when we think about undoing it, it becomes very challenging. That's also why a lot of the talk is abstraction, abstraction, abstraction. And every time we move to the question of method, it becomes very difficult because we are impatient. We are very impatient, you know. A scientific project or the academic project, which is the framework in which I operate, teaches us that you need to be very patient, to be very careful, to be very systematic, you know, in having to develop methods, tools, approaches to seek to understand something, to investigate something, to seek to establish what facts are, and then to reach conclusion and then to challenge those conclusions. And that is a challenge that we have when we talk about decolonizing research methods. It is first taking time to understand how these methods have come to constitute what we consider as facts, what we consider as forms of truth, what we consider as particular conclusions, in order to understand the ways in which they've excluded, you know, other forms. I always find it interesting every time we talk about decolonizing methods or talking about alternative methods, immediately we move and we say indigenous methods, you know. You know, we need to add these ones on board. But for us who are located here in the South, and for those who are located in the South through their thinking, through their methods, through their theories, and through their ideas, decolonizing methodologies requires that we need to invest even more time to understand the context, to understand the histories, and to understand the particular, not just the semantics, but also the ways in which particular methodologies work and operate. So we need to do that work first, because every methodology is developed to deal with a particular anxiety. So when you read the works of people like Valentino Mudimbe, and his thing about his concept of the colonial library, when you take Pauline Otonji and the idea that even our own methodologies are all extroverted, and that our entire scientific purpose is really to produce raw materials so that finished goods can be made outside of here. When you take people like Ifeoma Diome or Yeronke, and the idea that certain concepts that we use have particular histories, and therefore to be able to decolonize means we must understand those histories and introduce what Elisio Makamo and Mamadou Diawara call a scientific conceptual vocabularies to make our own experiences intelligible, it means that there's so much that we have to do, that it is not just deploying other ways of understanding reality, but really spending time to also understand where, what, who, and also the different manifestations of these particular methodologies that we are doing. So that's the first work that we have to do. Deep sociologies of ideas, a redoing of the sociology of ideas, a redoing of the history of science, of the history of the scientific project, of the history of knowledge, scientific knowledge production, because I'm talking about scientific knowledge production here. And then to do what Ashim Bembe talks about, expanding knowledge archives. And expanding knowledge archives, for me, means that we need to invest in extending and expanding different modes of inquiry, different modes of understanding society, different modes of this systematic method, different modes of investigation, different modes of reaching conclusions. So it's not just any mishmash, but that we are trying to establish different ways by which other people systematically seek to pose questions and understand reality, understand nature, and reach conclusions and reach facts. So that's really decolonizing, what decolonizing methodology for me means. It's a lot more work. I don't think we have yet reached that point. So I've read lots of different works, lots of different research that colleagues do, and many other people around who are attempting to get to that point. But I think we are still at the beginning to get to that, to get to that point. So I do think that it is the goal or objective or purpose of this generation to begin to do that work, that we should go to begin to look for procedural way or other procedural forms of inquiry, for other systematic forms of investigation, to other ways of establishing facts, other ways of reaching conclusions. And we can only do that through deep historical work. We've tried to do it through the work we're doing with artificial intelligence, and really trying to understand artificial intelligence, not just at the level of impact and its manifestations, but really going back to the origins, what I call here the original sin of technology. So where does it come from? Its history, right from post-Enlightenment, and what does it mean to begin to undo something that enters the world already with deep problems? Yeah, and that's what I have to say, Trish. So thank you. I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Divine, for such a very amazing contribution to the session. Do we have any questions in the chat, Trish? But if not, I can get us started with some questions.
We've got someone with a hand up, I think, Wafa.
Oh, Wafa, sorry, yes, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just want to add to what the gentleman just said now, moving from freedom to liberation. So to do that, we have first to liberate minds and shift the mindsets, because this comes from is matters of ideology and belief. For example, the colors that exist. If I ask anyone what colors that exist, they're gonna say white, black, purple, maroon, like red. So we don't see these colors in human at all. It's kind of ideology that is built up in people's minds. For example, in aesthetic, where they are professional in skins, they talk about dark, light, fair, tans. They don't talk about colors. Also, from my background as in biology, I studied evolution and adaptation to the environment and geography of the land. People live, more do you move from the north to the south, the shade of the tone of the skin gets gradually darker as an adaptation to the environment to resist to UV and sun. So it is a privilege rather than something to be worried about. So why do we have to believe on colors in human when they don't exist? So we should believe that we are different and everyone is unique the way they are, and everyone, so instead of being, so it's kind of diversity that can bring something good, positive, not something negative. So I think it's kind of ideology and mindset that they were like set in people's mind, and people, they feel bad about it. And I think there is, because for example, I'll give you an example. My country back home is Morocco, and the geography in Morocco is quite a country that come in a thin, longitudinal thin way, and more move from that close to Europe, Tangier, to the south of Sahara, the tone of the skins gets darker. And I never had any, we never had any issue from we are different, because we all the same, we are all human. So this is my thinking about this, because I see too many people think about their color, and they are worried, and some of them even they feel bad. I had a child in my class, girl, she said, she came to me, I'm not happy because I'm black. I saw her with the black frame that was behind. I told her, are you same? She said, no. So I told her, you're not black. So if you take a person who says, I am white, against a white paper, he's not white. And the person he says, I'm black, he believes that he's black, against black frame or something at the blackboard or something, they're not black. So this kind of it's just like ideologies that are being set to make people to provoke that supremacy, and other people, they're gonna feel always low, and they have to do something to
become equal,
like to satisfy the supremacy in others. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Wafa. If we even go back to it, I think there's research that suggests that it was a psychology, actually. I am from psychology, but I will say psychology was actively used to create that dissociation between white and black, that kind of othering based on that use of that vocabulary. So thank you for letting us know that. For giving us your comments on that, but also it's still ingrained and embedded within the research process. So I think my question to Divine would be that, like you are saying that we have to confront whiteness in order for us to kind of truly decolonize research. But if whiteness is actually embedded within the research system itself, how do you propose that we actually go about doing
that? Thank you very much, Carisha. Again, I want to make the difference between white and whiteness.
Yes.
So that's very important to make that difference. And also to understand that whiteness is an essence that's not a monopoly of being white. So that's very important. So we often conflate. Most white people actually don't qualify to be white with whiteness. So it's an essence. It can be black. It's just like patriarchy that can inhabit men as much as inhabit women. So that's very important that we make that difference. And the way to take us there is to invest. We often, because of the challenge that we face, don't apply ourselves enough to understand the challenge and how the challenge manifests itself. To undo this challenge, we have to understand it, like when I tell my colleagues here at the Institute of Humanities, which I head, that it's very interesting. We have to really invest a lot to understand Greek, understand German, and understand Arabic. Also to see, and all languages, to see how a lot of this knowledge was recoded from elsewhere, the evolution of that coding, and in order to undo it, So there's a lot of work that we have to do. It is embedded, the scientific method that we do, a lot of the research that we do is embedded in whiteness, but our job is to decode it, to spend time to unpack it. What what was the process by which it came to be, so that we can also undo that process, you know. And how do we undo it? You can't undo something that you don't understand, you know. And that's what Amadume and Mankamo and Diawara, when they talk about finding conceptual vocabularies that make our own scientific conceptual vocabularies that make our experiences intelligible, that's what they're pushing for, that we need to invest in finding concepts that can really help to explain this reality. So it's not enough to just pick up a concept and say, you know, here, there is, I use the example of good morning, you know. In my place, we don't have good morning, you know. Why would you say good morning to someone? The morning is good, you know. There are other things, you know. But it doesn't mean that there is no greeting for the morning. So when I ask people, you know, how do you say good morning? They find a word for it immediately. They find an expression. They've done literal translation. What Hari Garuba is talking about, literal translation. He's talking about finding different circuits of value. Our thinking is caught in that circuit of value. So we have to acknowledge it, undo it, but find other circuits of value, which good morning, you could also say, has your sun risen? Has the sun risen for you? It's not good morning. Has the sun risen for you? It's a completely different concept, because you're trying to understand that in a different context. So if you inhabited a world which began by asking whether the sun has risen for you, the reality is very different. But once you're living in a world in which the sun has risen and all you're thinking about is whether the morning is good, you're messed up, you know. So that's what I mean. The work that we have to do has to transcend just having to say being white, being black, being woman, being man, you know, being gay, being that is bad. So we need a lot of work to undo. Systematic, methodic. If you recall, I kept emphasizing we must find systematic, we must find methodic, we must find ways of organizing knowledge, of checking facts. So we understand us and undo what has inhabited us and the other. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Divine. Do you have any kind of ideas of people who are leading the way in terms of these new systematic methodologies that we can look into?
Yes, there's so many. That's I started off, I have emphasized a lot about the work of Mamadou Diawara and Eliseo Makamo. Mamadou Diawara has this really beautiful work that he does around arts, music, and what happens to copyright. When a griot gets into a copyright shop, what happens, you know? So when he takes something that belongs to society and he takes the register, what happens? If you read Eliseo Makamo, has done a lot of work about crisis in Mozambique. What happens to the concept of crisis after the disaster, when he goes in and people say there's no crisis, and the whole world and development work is investing in resolving a crisis and a disaster in Mozambique. So there is so much of Amadume's work, which around women, the invention of women, and many other ideas. There's a lot that we can build upon. The problem is that we don't have the patience, you know, to, we want the solutions now. The anti-colonial work we are not looking at, the post-colonial work we are not looking at, you know, and now the decolonial work. We really need a lot of patience and turn our own classrooms, our own curricula, our own units into spaces where we try to understand the ways in which the particular modes of thinking, modes of scientific production have come to establish themselves, and then try to do research into how other modes of production seek to understand reality. And then how do we, as Mujimbe would say, the colonial library cannot escape you. So how do we ensure that there's a cohabitation between this problematic one and the new mode of production? So it's like a virus. When a virus hits you, if the host, you are the host and you kill the virus, you die. If the virus kills the host, the virus dies. So we have to coexist. And that's the work that we should do. So if we read these other people, it allows us to go back to do the empirical work, to send students, to send ourselves out, to ask, what is a world in which people say has the sun risen? What does it mean? How does this translate, to ways of life? In parts of Cameroon, when a body dies, people do some kind of autopsy. It's been for generations, we cannot seek to understand what are they trying to do. It's coded as witchcraft. It ends. So we don't try to understand it as a mode, of inquiry. They're trying to establish why this person died, etc. So we just code it as witchcraft and it ends, There's a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much, Divine. We're gonna pass on to Medinat now, but there are some questions in the chat if you are able to answer those. Or Trish can support you in answering those questions. So for instance, someone wants you to write the names of the people that you just mentioned for them to look at. Okay, thank you so very much. That was such an amazing presentation. Thank you. So we are going to move on to our final presenter now, which is Medinat. Oh, Malifakis. Am I doing it right, Medinat? Have I pronounced your name correctly, Medinat? Okay. And she is coming to us from Nadell, where she's a senior lecturer, and she'll be speaking to us about decolonizing research partnerships. So, Medinat, do you have slides for us to? Oh, she's there on her slides. Okay, thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me and can you see my slides, please? Sorry, I can't see anyone anymore, so please just...
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Oh, cool. All right. So today I will be talking about decolonizing research partnerships. What is on the agenda today is to, first of all, set a kind of a background of what we understand as research partnerships. I would then try to briefly talk about the kind of hegemonies that we have been noticing in research partnerships that necessitate decolonizing, and also the impacts of these kinds of hegemonies on the research partnerships that we see around. As Joseph mentioned earlier, decolonization is a journey. It's not the end itself, but a process. And so after talking about these hegemonies, I would also try to talk about what we can do to get to this journey of having decolonized partnerships. And I will also share at the end what a decolonized partnership, how it can benefit not just the research community or the academic community, but also other people who are involved in various kind of partnership that involves people from Africa and Asia, Latin America, and Europe on the other side. And you can see that I'm choosing my words very carefully. You would find out why in the course of the presentation. So maybe to start first with what the definition of a research partnership is, especially in the context of this conversation that we're having. So understand that this is viewed or empiricized as a participation that is jointly carried out by two parties. Sometimes the term partnership is also a bit not controversial, but a bit problematic, because when you call something a partnership, it means that it necessitates some kinds of behaviors and some kinds of processes just by using that word partnership. For research partnerships, it should also be joint knowledge seeking, sharing, and of course, dissemination. And we have grown to understand that it's very important to have research partnerships because they help with knowledge advancement. They also help in addressing mutual or global challenges across the world. We've seen research partnerships, for instance, that have led to groundbreaking solutions in specific diseases or other required technological advancements. And we also know that quite some research partnerships have led to innovations in both academic and non-academic fields. It also helps with sharing resources, especially when it comes to funding that is required for partnerships. And it helps, or it should be helping with managing expertise, especially when we talk about expertise that is required for specific kind of thematic studies this is also why we should have partnerships. We have different types of partnerships. They could be between countries, they could be cutting across various disciplines. Sometimes they are also just institution-based. And we also have growing prominently right now public and private sector collaborations and partnerships. Why are we even talking about needing or requiring decolonization in research partnerships? The reason is because over time, historically and also contemporarily, we have noticed that there continues to be a reflection of hegemonies in research partnerships. And these hegemonies cut across colonialism, racism, and skin color-based power imbalances. Divine was trying to make a difference between white and whiteness. And I think it's important to note here also that quite a lot of the power imbalances are translated based on this lack of a mental setup that equates whiteness with the color of a skin and not as a set of privileges. We'll also talk about this. There are four basic categories in which these hegemonies reflect in research partnerships. The first is the question of task distribution, where, for instance, we have seen that in many instances, when there is a research partnership situation, the leadership of such partnership is already assumed or taken over by the country that is funding the partnership, and there's no requisite regard for either the expertise or the competencies of the other members of the partnership. And this means that in most situations, other people who are part of the partnership but are not providing the funding are relegated to minimal involvement in such partnerships or only providing logistical arrangements, sometimes as mundane as being the ones who only book the hotels or book the flights for other people participating in the partnerships. We also see that then this leads to quite a lot of unequal distribution or uneven distribution of power between the research partners. And it also means that people or partners who are not from the funding country then do not have the bargaining power or the influence to make quite important decisions or changes in such partnerships. The second area where we have seen quite a reflection of this hegemonies is in decision-making, where we have seen that in instances where this is problematic, quite a lot of the thematics and the focus of research partnerships are developed from countries, mostly European, or those who have the money, and they're only shared or the other partners are only informed about these topics in order for them to have an ethical review of it or to start to implement the topic for the research partnerships. It also means that this is negatively affecting knowledge hierarchies, where, for instance, what is considered as knowledge, what is considered as acceptable research methodologies, we just had a conversation about that, and what is considered as empirical research results are often unilaterally decided and not co-created amongst research partners. There's also, when it comes to decision-making, an issue with the institutional barriers where the framework for research, for instance, are always not decentralized, they're not decentered, they are always developed by specific partners in such, and they continued in this way then to perpetuate colonial dependencies like we already know about it. I think the third part has to do with this question of fairness. For instance, in the aspects of who gets recognized in research partnerships for data collection, who gets recognized for authorship of research results, who get recognized or who is allowed to come to do the presentation of research findings. We see that this question of fairness does not have any institutional framework that governs it. And so in most instances, because of this lack of institutional framework, the question of fairness in research partnerships is left to the largesse or the discretion of research partners. And in most situations, we see that what comes out of it is then considered quite unfair to certain partners in the research. I think the last thing to mention in this part of the presentation is about also the language and cultural differences that perpetuate racism and colonialism in research partnerships. For instance, there's limited inclusion of quite some languages that are considered indigenous languages in research partnerships. There's a refusal in some research partnerships to recognize academic contributions that are in languages that are not of or from the West. There's also an inability for some partners to publish research findings in their own language because these are not languages that are considered universal Western languages. Apart from all of this, then comes the use of certain words or certain phrases in partnerships that are quite problematic. For instance, examples of such words would be rich versus poor countries, research rich versus low-income countries, first world versus third world, developed versus underdeveloped, high-income countries versus low-income countries, global north versus global south, beneficiaries versus donors, capacity building and capacity strengthening. All of these words, when we look at the historicity of these words and the ways that they are applied and the mental setup that necessitates their use, we could see that there are relics of colonialism and racism in them. When we have such hegemonies coming into research partnerships, the biggest impact that we have is that we have partnerships that have been mismanaged. And this is because the competences and the expertise that should govern the management of research partnership is not based on practical criteria, but just based on who has the money, which funding country is responsible for initiating the partnerships, and which topics are dominating it. Wafa has talked about mentalities today, and it's also something that we see when we have problematic research partnership, is because then we see that the mentalities of inequality, the mentalities of one specific group of partner being superior to another is reinforced. This then affects, of course, the quality of the knowledge that is produced, where it's really focused or tailored towards the prism of Western knowledge seeking in that sense. And then, of course, comes the unequal relationships between these two partner groups. And this permeates then also not just the research process itself, but the research results when such partnerships are concluded. It also dilutes, in most instances, the outcomes of research, in the sense that because the people who sometimes do the rigor of the research methodologies are not properly involved in either the application of such methodologies or in the data collection or even in producing the research result, what happens or what is the result of such partnerships are diluted research outcomes. From the research and from the conversations that we were having, what needs to change when we talk about research partnerships, or how do we foresee a decolonized research partnership? The first is that the partnership process itself needs to change. This includes, for instance, the ways of working, the process of involving partners, the process of developing partnerships when it comes to research needs to change. The stages of involvement also of partners needs to be reworked. We should not have researchers from the West, for instance, starting or already developing what the focus and the thematics of research partnerships should look like, and then the partners from other parts of the world are only involved at specific stages or only at the end of the research. There should also be co-created research plans and focus right from the beginning between partners. The second is the structure of partnerships, which is quite important when we talk about, for instance, the kind of limitations that partners have when it comes to funding. We know that a lot of funding for research partnerships comes from the West, but we need the frameworks that allows that permeates this to be changed. When funding comes from other countries or other contexts, it also should not equal to who manages or who heads research partnerships. It also should not permeate into what influence the funding countries would have on the methodologies that are used for research partnerships. The third that I would like to highlight is on the principles of the partnership. We talk about fairness, bias, and respect and mutual collaborative principles that we know should be a given, but we find out that in certain research partnerships, this is not the case. And there's a thin line between mentioning this as a decolonized solution or as an example of just good partnership principles. However, there are specific fairness issues that are really connected to racism. They are connected to power imbalances because of funding, that are connected to relics and the historical analysis of colonialism. There are biases and assumptions that come and are directly related to this. And when we talk about a change in partnership principles, we are really focused on this specific parts, right? For instance, accountability to the people who participated not just in the research process, but also in the data collection, the people who were, for instance, the interlocutors during this research. These are the people that we refer to need accountability for these partnerships when we talk about this. And then I've given you examples earlier of those kinds of languages and communications in research partnerships that needs to change. We can't have use of words and phrases and processes and research partnerships that do not label wrongly people's realities, that are very specific to context, that are also context sensitive to both the people and the countries involved in these partnerships. And when we do all of this, then we see that the language do not undignify people. The language is respectful and the communication is very authentic to the realities of the partner organizations. And one example of a toolkit or a language and communication tool that we can use for this is what we have developed in NADEL that is called the Words Matter Glossary. This is a guide to choice of word that is very, of course, specific to international cooperation because we are a department that is focused on global cooperation and sustainable development. However, if you check out the Words Matter Glossary, it's actually applicable to other sectors as well. And why did we develop this Words Matter Glossary? Is because we feel, NADEL, that the vocabulary that is used in the international cooperation sector has, of course, origins in colonialism, but also continue then to perpetuate this inequality and power dynamics. And we decided that it was time to, as a team, reflect on the use of the language for our students, for our curriculum, for our pedagogical usage also, and also in the research and teaching that we do with the students. And what we then did was to have a table of terms that we believe were problematic. We then outlined why we think that these are potentially problematic and offer potential alternatives in certain cases to this. Like I said, when we did this, the audience was only for ourselves and for professionals and lecturers who are working in the international cooperation sector, but it is something that is applicable to everyone as well. When we get to this journey, or if we are lucky enough to be able to get to the landscape of decolonized research partnerships, what we should expect then are co-created research outcomes where all partners feel represented and are able to work as a partner in such partnerships. We would be able to see that research results are informed by and beneficial to not just the people we have collected data from who are the interlocutors, but also other people who participated in one way or the other during the research partnership process. We will then be able to have diversified knowledge and not knowledge that is only applicable or considered to be worthy of being knowledge by a specific group of people, just based on also not just the color of the skin, but where funding for such knowledge production processes are coming from. We would have reduced quite a lot of brain drain because we know now that the way that research partnerships are set up is a bit skewed to giving advantage to brain drain from other countries to the West. And the last is that hopefully we will be able to get to what Wafa mentioned, a shift in the mental setup where partnerships are not set up and not implemented based on inequality or unequal distribution or unequal processes, even right from the beginning. When, for instance, part of some partnership documents are labeled as requiring or should have as an output a capacity shift, a capacity sharing from one institution or one country to the other. So you start a partnership process with already this mental thinking that one partner would need capacity building and one partner would need their capacities developed through these partnerships. We hope that if we do all of this, then we would have been able to shift from that mental setup of having those kind of very problematic research partnerships. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Marinat. I have questions, but I want to see firstly if anyone else has questions because I feel like I'm dominating the question space. Are there any questions? Does anybody want to raise their hand and say something or type it into the chat? Well, then I will get started. Okay, so I really thoroughly enjoyed your talk. Thank you so very much. We are short on time, so I'll be very quick with my questions. So when you were talking about the partnerships, within academia itself and within research, there's this traditional master servant type way. So for instance, when you finish, well, you know it anyway, because you are an academic. When you're in your PhD, your supervisor is the be all and end all. Then when you get your first postdoc, the researcher is the be all and end all, and your work goes towards the contributions towards their paper and enhancing their kind of overall profile. So if that is what's embedded within academia, then it's kind of only natural. Well, I'm not saying natural. I'm not saying that it's good. I'm saying it's natural that like when we come from a first world country, that's a word, but a bad thing, a developed country, and we're working with, for instance, a developing country, that is just a natural translation. So then how do you propose that we can get over this natural kind of traditional embedding of that master servant kind of process of engaging in research within academia? Have I explained myself well? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yes, Carisha, you have, thank you very much for your question. I think that's the big or the quite insurmountable solution to that, but then there's also the much more personalized solution that we can start with for that. The institutional framework is the problematic in that situation. But as a student, be you a master or PhD student, you should start, I think, by educating yourself on what colonial hegemonies can come through when you're doing your master's or when you're doing your PhD, to even understand what can go wrong so that you position yourself when all of this happens. You know exactly what the situation is and how you would want to navigate this. But you cannot do this if you don't have prior knowledge of what kind of hegemonies translate, how colonialism can reflect in the relationships or in the processes of working with a supervisor in this context. So the first is the learning part. Then the unlearning comes in, where you have to also do away with the thinking that positions your supervisor as the master and knower of this, because you can know what is happening, but your mental setup is still conditioned to be the servant, because it's incorrect in that sense. But if you work within that setup, if you don't unlearn the process for this, for instance, with the student, you have to unlearn the mentality of this. Somebody is the servant and somebody is the master, and then develop pathways of how you would deal with this. For some people, it's more confrontational to always highlight when situations like this happen and to say that this is not right, this is not supposed to be like that. For quite other people, it's more about internalization. You have to develop personally how you want to deal with it. And this, for me, is the personal side. The other part, the institutional part, the one that places your supervisor as the master, is the one that needs confrontation much more through institutional framework changes. And that's what we're advocating for in this side. You as a person might not be able to successfully deal with this alone, but you can contribute in different ways by either focusing on researches about this and calling things out when they happen, and having, for instance, this kind of forums where you also understand how this processes needs to change and what kind of actions you can take towards changing them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Medinat. I think there is a question in the chat. I know people do have to leave. We are slightly over time, so do leave if you need to leave. So they're asking if this is the final version. If you just look in the chat, if that's the final version. Yeah.
So when we talk about final, no, because the glossary is like a continuous document that we are updating quite a while, especially as we find like new words or new problematics with certain words. So we would not have a final version anytime soon, but we will keep updating the glossary as we work towards, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I do have one more question.
Before we need to do that, Krisha, we have an anonymous question. I hope you can hear
go
me.
ahead. Yeah.
Someone's asked, by equitable here, I'm thinking of and referring to methods of analysis that promote intersectional understandings. I think intersectional understandings are more important than equity during analysis. I think here they're asking about how with approaches in terms of analysis, how they make those more equitable during research partnership deals. Does that make sense?
Where is it written, Trish?
It's on the Q&A.
Oh.
If you can't see it, that's okay. I'll post it in the chat and
Okay.
you can respond later.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. My last question was, how do we ensure that local partners have a strong voice in joint projects, particularly when research is very English oriented? How do we manage that kind of engaging with partners from different languages and how ensure that their voice is still heard?
Yeah, so this is for us like a really integral part of the way that we work. So from the beginning, you have to determine or decide if the partnership that you would like to implement is one of those partnerships, or if you're going to have decolonial aspects incorporated into it. And if you make the decision to make those partnership processes and frameworks decolonial, then you would have to walk the talk. In that sense, you have to empower the local organizations or partners to be able to be the word. Okay, so because now somebody talked about equitable, I wanted to use the word equitable, but maybe not. So the word is like, if it's a partnership, then it needs some kind of equal footing for both people, no matter what the process is, no matter where the money is coming from and where's the expertise coming from. And if we already see that there are things that would cause imbalances, then we have to balance it out with other things. So for instance, if one partner organization or one partner country has the funding, then the expertise should be balanced with another partner organization. So this whole, let's talk about like local partners need to do this and need to do that. If you already treat them as partners from the beginning, then it means that co-creation is at the bedrock of the relationship. It means that equitable distribution of tasks and responsibilities is at the background of the relationship. It means that the research partnership is managed based on expertise and not based on the color of the skin. It also means that outcomes, methodologies are based on what is required for the research partnership's progress itself and not based on who is bringing the money and who knows it all in that context. So nobody would so thinking that we need to hand over things to partners. It's a partnership. It means that everybody has equal footing. So the partner organization from whichever country it is, I don't want to use the word local because that's already also inculcating some kind of inequality. Something is local, then that means that there's something that is better than local. And what would that be? So
yeah,
to just be, if it's a partnership, it has to be equal, and it means that everybody should have equal decision-making processes despite where the funding is coming from. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marinad. In the interest of time, I'm gonna have us close up right now. But I really very much enjoyed this entire kind of session, and I really want to thank all three of our speakers for the amazing insights that you have provided, as well as Joseph for giving us that overview and of the work that you have done. I will end up by again putting a little spiel in about what we have planned next. So the next steps are essentially that because for each of the themes that we're working on, we're having a large event like this one within Decolonizing Research. And then the next step is going to be a series of workshops across the faculties to apply what we've learned today and what is present within the research, within the launch paper, to actual work within the faculties to develop actual manuals that give examples of how to apply decolonial research practices, decolonial research partnerships, decolonial research impact, etc., within each of the faculties. And it will start off in April. We don't have the actual kind of mechanisms in place just yet, so we are still organizing them. But if you are interested in attending, then please do register your interest in attendance. And I think that is it for me. John, do you have anything that you want to end off with saying?
No, just thanks to all of the speakers and to Joseph and to the participants for their time and questions today. It's been another fantastic and really insightful session with a great deal to take away from today and to continue to think about and act on.
Thanks, everyone. If you guys are happy to share your slides as well, we'll be in touch. But everyone should know that the session has been recorded and it will be shared as well. All right. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.